Thank you so much for joining me today on the Online Business Show. I'm sure all my listeners are going to be really excited to hear about this topic. It's something that I get asked about a lot and have no expertise in. So I'm really looking forward to picking your brain. For everyone watching, this is Katharine. Katharine is on her 4th career. She couldn't be more impressive by that. She's also an published author of a coaching book and is in the process of looking to be published for her new novel as well. Katharine, please do introduce yourself to all the watchers today.
Hi, lovely to see everybody in theory. So I'm really focusing right now on getting my thriller published, which features a coach who actually starts coaching a slightly dodgy government minister. And this is really based on 2 of my former careers. The first one where I had 20 years in the civil service, working with ministers very regularly, and the second where I was coaching senior leaders for a similar length of time. So I've had massive fun putting those 2 bits of my previous careers together and putting together, yes, coaching and life in Whitehall, life working with ministers, politics and so forth. So I'm having good fun at the moment trying to find an agent, because ideally I would like to get it published by the traditional route, but we may talk more about that later.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to dive in on that. But the reason that I wanted Katharine on is because I see so many of the entrepreneurs in the online business world write a book in their bucket list of goals that they would like to do. And although she is in the process now of getting published, she has previously published a book called Internal Coaching, The Inside Story. So can speak to kind of creating a book about something that is relevant to your business. So that's going to kick us off nicely to, what do you feel is the reason that everyone wants to get published?
I'm seeing it, like you, I'm seeing it more and more. And I think there's quite a lot of different reasons why people want to get published. And, all very valid. I mean, some of them are to do with raising your profile, I think. So if you can say that you've published a book, then there's something about what it says about you and how serious you are about your career or whatever it is that you're writing about. It sort of indicates passion, because frankly, nobody writes a book, goes into it lightly, It's not something you can dash off in a weekend. It's something that needs a lot of thought, and goodness knows, a lot of time putting on the keyboard. It's not something that people do lightly, but I think the rewards can be great. And also you don't have to work. I mean, my book was a long one, it was like 90,000 words kind of book. But actually, I think a lot of people write shorter books, which they can then use as a calling card, with potential clients. Yeah. I remember years ago, there was a guy in a coaching company called Preister, which still exists, and he used to produce really quite short booklets on quite small sort of areas of coaching. And he would hand them out like anything to potential clients and so on. And I think, so when you say book, it can mean a lot of different things, can't it? It can mean it could be a weighty tome, or it could actually be something quite minor, quite small, quite specific, but nonetheless very helpful to potential clients. Because you're giving away, aren't you? You're giving a bit of content away to people, basically, which can be very helpful to them.
Yeah, I have a whole series of videos that talk about what we call lead magnets, and usually that's some kind of downloadable resource. Sometimes it's an ebook, but sometimes it can be like checklists and all that sort of stuff. But I do see a lot of people do use physical books, but very small, like you said, very small, very digestible books as a lead magnet. So if you want to hear more about how you can leverage a freebie to getting more clients, so to speak, have a little look through my channel. I'll pop a link on the screen in the top corner, and you can dive in on that subject, because it's a big one.
Oh, that sounds great.
And I will say, though, I think for some people it's a little bit of an ego thing. I think a lot of people don't actually want to write a book. They want to say they've written a book. And then there's the people who truly want to write and share about what they know.
You may be right, but if it's, I mean, I can absolutely hear what you're saying. I have noticed that often at conferences, people might have, you know, a little stack of the short variety of book, and it does mean, you know, it's like having, instead of giving them a business card, you're just giving people something a bit more substantial, aren't you? But it's still got all your contact details in it, and
Yeah,
still remember you.
yeah, absolutely. And I do see that there's huge benefits in terms of personal branding, authority, all of those sorts of things, of being able to say, not only have I spent the time to carve out and write a book, but someone else has published it as well. Someone else has looked at this and said it's worthy of an audience and put it out there, is a whole nother thing.
Well, that is a whole nother thing, because often if people are doing these little short ones, the odds are it hasn't actually been published by someone else.
Yes.
They've probably produced it themselves, and there's nothing wrong with that either. There was something in the bookseller this week about, this is fiction rather than non-fiction, but it's saying that people who self-publish are actually making more money than people who go to traditional publishers.
Oh, really? Interesting. Well, I suppose there's no one to split it with, so to speak.
Absolutely, no one to split it with. And of course, you know, one of the other advantages of self-publishing is that you get, you know, you have more control. You decide what goes on the cover, you decide the title, you decide everything. The price, absolutely. But the downside, and the reason why for plan A with my novel I'm going for traditional publishing, is because they do all the work, if you like.
Yeah, the resources.
They have it, exactly. So they've got a team around them of people who design wonderful book covers, people who copy edit, people, you know, PR people who fix up podcasts or vlogs or all these different things. Basically, the publishing company will organise it if you're traditionally published, which is, so although you're splitting a lot of money with them, there's a whole team of people working behind the scenes who are producing the book, which otherwise you'd have to do yourself. And that too, I mean, we're talking about actually writing a book, something not to be taken lightly, but self-publishing is not to be taken lightly either. I mean, someone like you, Bethan, with a background in marketing, you know, it would be a different kettle of fish, because that's often the bit that people stumble over most if they self-publish, is how to get it out there.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to kind of stick on this subject while it's come up, and kind of talk about publishing versus self-publishing. Could you just break that down a little bit for someone who's maybe not familiar with the terms? What do you mean by being published or self-publishing?
Yeah, so being traditionally published means that you go to one of the big publishing houses, and the system is different for fiction and non-fiction. So for non-fiction, you'd basically pitch a proposal to a big publishing house, and you'd say, this is what I'm proposing to write. You'd probably do an outline of what's going to go in each chapter, what's the subject, obviously, and then maybe give some sample chapters. And you might pitch it direct to a publisher if it's non-fiction, or you might pitch it to an agent who specialises in non-fiction. But you do have the option of going direct to a publisher, particularly a business book, to one of the big public, you know, like Sage or whoever.
Yeah.
Fiction is different. Fiction, you can't go direct to a publisher. You have to go via an agent.
Okay.
But so that's, and then only if you get an agent, and that's the tricky bit, because it's something like, they get something like 1,500 manuscripts a year, between 1,500 and 2,000 manuscripts a year, and they take on one new author a year, you know, so the odds are quite tricky. But that's the traditional route, is going by an agent and then to a traditional publisher, where, as I say, they do all the work. They've got the team that can get it out there and can get it into a bookshop.
Yes.
That's one of the big things. You know, self-published books don't really get into Waterstones. You really need to be published by a traditional publisher in order to get your book into a bookshop. Self-publishing is a very different kettle of fish, because you're in control of everything. You can decide. I mean, a very common way of self-publishing is producing an ebook and putting it directly onto Amazon or other platforms. But equally, you may want to produce a physical book, and we were sort of talking about physical books up until now, weren't we, in terms of leaving a calling card or whatever. But equally, you could email a potential client, couldn't you, and attach a link to an ebook. But with physical books, self-publishing to me feels like very hard work, I have to say, because you're having to learn all the skills that exist within a publishing house and do them yourself, or pay someone else to. So pay a publicist to publicize it for you, pay somebody to market it for you, pay someone to design the cover, whatever, to typeset it, all those bits that the publishers do for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, if you're somebody listening and you have a background in marketing, that might feel like something that you can take on. But I will say, as somebody who is, I have I have one of those low content books that we're going to be launching. Bit of a spoiler, actually, for anyone watching. That's not even been announced yet, but we're going to be publishing a low content book. It's a social media checklist for online business owners. And even just the process of the kind of layout and making sure that when that's printed, it's going to line up correctly and it's going to work properly has been a nightmare. And that's using the bit of a cheat system through Amazon where you can upload your file and they'll print it on your behalf and take care of all the logistics of getting it printed through a printer. You still have to know and understand and be able to create the file in order to print. And it's so much more work than I think you could imagine, without adding on then all the marketing of said project on top. So I think you've explained it. I'd love to hear you break down a couple more pros and cons that you think each side may have.
People talk an awful lot when it comes to self-publishing about control.
Yeah.
You're not only controlling things, as you say, like the price, how it looks, which if you've got some kind of design expertise might be massive fun. I have zero design expertise, and the thought of producing a fab cover would put me into meltdown. I think it would not be my skill set at all. But other people, people who self-publish actually love the fact that they're not being dictated to by someone else, because at the end of the day, if you go with a traditional publisher, it's up to them. I mean, you can say I don't like it very much, or you can put in your view, but they don't have to take it. At the end of the day,
really interesting. I thought you'd get at least some say. I thought you'd get maybe a veto or two to say not for me.
Well, you'd be consulted. And actually, my non-fiction book, Internal Coaching: The Inside Story, I did get that it was part of a series. So all I got consulted on, so the design was the same for every book in the series, but you could choose the colours.
Okay.
I was going to guess it for a moment, but I won't. Anyway, because I love bright colours. So I've now got it in kind of shopping pink and purple and a lovely blue as the kind of colour range on the front of it. But when they originally sent it to me, it was a mixture of sort of sludgy greens and browns and a bit of yellow. And I thought, no.
Yeah.
So I did at least get a bit of choice on the colour. But that is one of the downsides, this whole bit about control. Or my self-publishers, the people who self-publish their books, say, I couldn't do that. They even decide that they're probably going to make a choice as to what the book will be called for fiction.
Interesting.
Only about a third of books which start off as something with a particular title actually keep that title all the way through to publication. Mostly they get changed. So this whole thing of control, I can sort of understand that. I mean, I'm so keen on having it looking gorgeous and ideally on bookshelves in Waterstones. That's the dream.
Yeah, the name, not so much in lights, but on shelves.
Yeah, well, lights will be all right. That's fine. A few fairy lights around the shelf, just sort of putting it out. That would work for me. But yeah, I can understand that people like the idea of having control. There's also the whole timing side of it, which is actually really important. So let's say tomorrow I get an agent for my fiction book. You work with the agent for maybe 3 to 6 months, getting it as good as it can be. They then pitch it to publishers. It might be then another 3 to 6 months. And then when it's perfect, you have to fit within their production schedule. It could be another 18 months or 2 years before it actually hits the shelf.
Gosh, that's such a long lead time.
It really, really is. Whereas if you decide you're going to self-publish, then, you sort the cover, you get somebody to do them. Absolutely. And out it goes.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly within 3 or 4 months, you could have done the whole you know.
Love that. I think for me, the biggest thing that stands out as the benefit for being published is probably the authority that comes with. I'm sure for a lot of people, getting all of the in-between bit taken off of your to-do list is a big pro. But yeah, I think there's a certain level of authority to being published by a publishing house that is harder to attain from self-published.
It's true. But self-published books can look so good that actually, unless people are, really looking at the small print on the back to see who it was published, they might or might not be aware of that with a non-fiction book, actually. But I agree, it does give a level of authority, and I guess there's something about, yes, reputation, credibility with your peers, other professionals in your business. I think you're right. I think it does have quite a lot. Well, yes, because it's both with potential clients and your peers, isn't there? I mean, they're both important. But I think generally speaking, you can't assume you're going to make any money.
Yes.
Which is something just worth putting out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we need to dive in on this, because I think a lot of people have, again, going back to the big write a book written somewhere on their bucket list of goals, being followed with like make £1 million, and as if the two come hand in hand. Now, I'm sure there's some benefits to being published as a coach, that it can generate you clients if it's relevant to your services and that sort of thing. But yeah, one of the big things that you mentioned is that it doesn't necessarily pan out in that way.
Quite rare. I mean, if you're published traditionally, you're probably going to get between 10 and 15% perhaps of the cover price in royalties. Amazingly, most non-fiction books don't sell more than about 100 copies. Now, a lot of this, of course, comes down to marketing. So traditional publishers work on a very, very tight margin. And unless you're a really big name, they're probably not going to give a massive amount to marketing your book.
Yeah.
So even with the traditional publishers, you are probably going to have to do quite a lot of marketing yourself, as well as whatever they do. And it's worth thinking about that in advance.
I think there's a reason that a lot of the people who do write successful business books have generated a massive following online first, because there's your audience. They're ready to go.
Absolutely. I mean, when it's a business book, then there is a question of whether you can get it into universities, maybe, or places where they do MBAs or whatever. If you can get it onto a reading list, that really, really helps. So my book's on various reading lists for coach training, and
amazing.
I was thrilled. And if you get it onto reading lists, of course, they may not necessarily buy it, but they will take it out from the library. Something called the ALCS, which basically collects money for authors where some of your book or chapter or something has been photocopied, or if people take it out of a library. So it's a tiny weeny. My mother came from Yorkshire, and she used to say, if it was something that was really small, you could put it in your eye and still see with it, and it comes into that kind of. You're not going to go out for many wonderful holidays on what you get being borrowed from a library, but it's still, it's not nothing, as it were. I used to joke, because my non-fiction book came out in 2014, which is obviously a long time ago now, and I used to joke that I hadn't yet got enough back in royalties to pay for the launch party, because they didn't do a launch party for me, the publisher. It's still comparatively rare, apparently. And I thought, well, I'm going to turn this into a social event. So I had about, 150, 200 people there. I wanted it to be a really good do. I paid for all this canapes and wine and everything. It cost about $3,000, and for ages I used to say, well, I still haven't earned enough royalties to pay for the launch party, but I'm pleased to say I now have earned enough.
Oh, congrats.
For the launch party.
Positive ROI from this point onwards. That's perfect. Well, that probably puts into perspective for some people and brings back to earth some people as to what they can expect with this kind of project.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it obviously depends on how broad the appeal is of your book. So my book's about internal coaching, where,
Very
People
specific.
coach people within their own organizations. It's
Yeah.
a very niche, it's a niche area. But if you're, if people are writing a book on something that is much more general, then your potential audience is that bit bigger, and so the potential for profits is bigger as well.
And I suppose from my side, I look at the kind of marketing, the personal branding and all that sort of stuff as a real natural progression. The only other thing to consider would be, does this open any doors? Does this impact potential clients and that sort of thing for your business? Can you speak to if the kind of the impact that it had on your business when you got published with your business book?
Absolutely. So I was actually what's called an external coach, which means, you go into an organization, you coach someone, you come out again. The book was about internal coaches, where people are coaching other people within their own organization. And therefore, the actual subject matter was not 100% related to what the book was about. I mean, I wrote it because I was invited to write it by the commission to write it. So if I'd had my sort of thinking hat on, I might have thought, well, actually, if I'm going to write a book, maybe I should write a book about external coaching. But anyway.
No, I think actually, just to interject there, I think that's really important to mention, is that in your case, this wasn't some grand master plan of I'm going to get more clients by writing this book. You were invited to create a book on the topic. Correct me if I'm wrong, from your dissertation or from a...
Yeah. I'd done a master's, exactly, you're right. And so the professor who was my research supervisor said to me, after he'd very kindly given me a distinction for my research, did you know that I'm the editor for a coaching series, which I hadn't known. And he said, can you turn this into a book? So that was lovely. But yes, you were saying about what difference it made to my business. Basically, it added a completely new strand to my business. So I had 6 years before I trained as a coach, being a management consultant. So I set up a little business, and I was doing quite a lot of consultancy in the public sector. And off the back of the book, I found that I was being invited to go and do consultancy with organizations who wanted to set up a whole internal coaching cohort within their business.
I see.
Which was lovely, because it gave me, I mean, I've always been a one for variety. I suppose that's why I've had 4 careers. I must have been bored at some point, need a change. So adding to the variety of stuff I did within my business was great. So the impact really was that I started being invited to speak at conferences. And even though I was speaking about internal coaching, it was still at coaching conferences. And therefore, there were people there interested in coaching who then, ended up in a partnership with a training company who uses my book as a kind of textbook on their courses, which is lovely, which means I'm still, my sales still going along nicely, even though it's 10 years later. I love speaking at conferences. I love doing little workshops and stuff on the subject matter of the book. So, and it means you're kind of learning all the time. I mean, there's nothing like being in front of an audience of new coaches to sort of re-energize you, and it's great fun. So it did. I mean, it had an unexpected but completely positive impact on my business. And
I suppose if it's not a case where it's a happy accident, as it was for you, you can kind of make the strategic decision to, okay, I'm going to write something that my services naturally lead on from. Really good example that comes to mind for me, actually 2 examples, are Atomic Habits by James Clear. He wrote a book all about how to generate habits. He sells a course on habit making and all of that sort of stuff. That's, of course, same with, there's a book that I always recommend to people. If you've watched this channel, you've probably heard me talk about it, How to Build a Story Brand, which is a great marketing book by a man called Donald Miller. And in the book, he quite often pitches his own services and his course and his signature program, so to speak. So there is a way to do it in which, if you've already established your business and it's a concerted effort of, okay, I'm going to write a book, how can that lead into potential clients? And it's a done thing in the industry, as far as I've seen.
Absolutely. And something that I've been noticing that is more and more of are sort of book coaches. I think they're called that. Anyway, people who help you to write your books. And I've been very aware, because I've been much more active on LinkedIn than I've ever been in the past, over the last 6 months or so. And I've met up with lots of really interesting people and had Zooms with them and so on, and got to know them. And when we're messaging, they often say, so if you need any help with your book, I know someone called, and I must have had recommendations of, about 50 perhaps different book coaches who go to people like the sort of people who may well be watching this, saying, you're interested in writing a book, I can help you write it, you know? And
Yeah.
it doesn't mean they're ghosting it. I don't think they're ghosting it. Some of them might actually write it for you, but most, you know, having interviewed you about what you want to say and so on. But I think mostly it's simply kind of mentoring you through
Yeah.
the process of working out what is it you want to say, how might you structure it. And so I think you still write it yourself, as I understand it, but you get real help in how to turn your experiences into a book that could be useful to use with clients.
Yeah, I can actually speak to that. There's a lady in my network who comes along to my monthly networking events, funnily enough, called the Monthly Meetup. She is called Dr. Charlotte Booth, and she is a copywriter, but also coaches people who are looking to write a book. And very specifically, she doesn't coach people who are just looking to write business books. She coaches people who, I know she's helped people write children's books and that sort of thing. So if it's just something that people want to do, she helps the process. And like you said, she doesn't write the book for you. She doesn't do the legwork. She guides you through the process of what, like, I know if I were to try and write a book tomorrow, I'd be like, Jesus Christ, where do I begin? And she has contacts within publishing and understands self-publishing, so can kind of guide you through the process of getting your foot up and getting started right the way through to what do you do to get it out there. And that can be a huge benefit if you're somebody who it's on your list of accomplishments that you'd like to do in life and just have no idea where to begin. They can definitely help.
Yeah, I had a Zoom with Charlotte. I think she's absolutely fab, and I'm sure she would be.
She's great.
Yeah,
I know she's good. I'm gonna have to send her this podcast now and be like, look, we talked about you.
Here's your fan club.
Yeah. And she's so no nonsense. She's so straight to the mark as well. She'll tell you exactly how it is with everything.
And you see, I mean, what she's basically doing is mentoring people. She's mentoring people through the process. And, you know, and I, having been a coach for 20 years and writing about a coach, you know, it's the same kind of skills involved in being a coach and being a mentor. I mean, the main difference that people talk about is that mentors actually have knowledge that they can transfer to you, as it were, rather than helping you to think through how you might solve your own problems.
From my knowledge, there's a happy blend of a bit of mentoring, a bit of coaching, and a bit of training in the industry, which is lovely. There's going to be certain things in that sort of route that you're not going to be able to answer yourself. You definitely need someone to point the path out for you.
Exactly. Well, I think it's great, and it's an example of a sort of a profession, as it were, or a line of business that's really grown up over the last year or two, I think. It's terrific.
So I want to follow on then. We talked about the impact that being published has had on your business. And you joked about the kind of, it didn't pay for the launch party for a long time. If monetary value wasn't a huge impact for you, why would you say to business owners, to coaches, that it's still worth being a goal on their list? It's still worth considering getting published?
Yeah, because I mean, I'm certainly not in the business of trying to encourage people to do it if it's not something that they'd really love to do. I mean, I think the first thing I'd say is, because it demands so much time, energy, brain work, that quite honestly, unless you really want to do it, I would not be trying to encourage you to do it at all. I think you absolutely have to want to do it.
Yeah.
I would say that one of the biggest buzzes ever is signing books for people.
Oh, yeah.
Out of all proportion to what you might think. Because I sometimes speak on these workshops for the training company that I'm sort of affiliated with, and because they're using it as a textbook, when I do sort of a one-to-one session with them, they've all got the book and they come up and ask me to sign it. And I'm going, well, yes. Yeah. But
let me just wet my pen for you.
Quite so. I mean, obviously, given that it takes months and months and months and months of hard work to produce it, that would not be a reason in itself.
Yeah.
Writing your own book. But
well, unless that really drives you, unless that's something that'll keep you going through the sticking points.
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose if one's putting money on it, I mean, the money that I earned from consultancy that I wasn't expecting of setting up, it was reasonably substantial for a couple of years in terms of my income stream. So, I'm sure it has to be useful. I do enjoy, particularly now I'm getting active on LinkedIn. There are people who sometimes message me just saying, they've had my book for the last 8 years. They used it in order to set up a thing of their organization. And, and you're thinking, oh, wow, it does. Just one person, saying that they enjoyed the book or got something out of it, just, it does give one a massive, massive buzz. But in terms of sort of hard-nosed, sort of putting one's business brain on, unless you're going to sell a really lot of copies and put a massive amount of energy into the marketing of it, the odds are you'll make a few thousand, but it's not going to be mega bucks.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, the way that you described that, because as soon as I asked what the benefits are, it was about knowledge sharing and authority and the kind of the feeling of other people having read your book. There was no mention there of like, it's going to blow up your business and it's going to become this massive thing. I think a lot of time people look at books as a route to marketing, which follows us on nicely then to when is the right case to focus on writing a book and becoming an author, and when is the right case to focus on just marketing a business. And those two things are how they kind of collide.
Yeah, and I guess that if you're not really passionate about wanting to produce a book, then the hard-nosed decision is probably that your time would be better spent on straightforward marketing than writing a book. I think it's helpful rather than being a sort of a key route to market, as it were.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I love that.
It's more an add-on rather than, the main thrust of your marketing strategy.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask that question specifically because we've already spoken and I thought that I knew the answer. And there are a few people who I think maybe needs just a bit of a reality of what the process of writing a book is going to become at the end point. And yeah, unless you're, I don't know, let's say Stephen Bartlett, he released a book fairly recently, last couple of years. I'm sure he made a significant amount of money from his book publishing, but the majority of people don't.
Yeah, I mean, he is such a phenomenon, isn't he?
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah. But no, the majority of people don't, as you say. And I mean, at least self-publishing now, you don't have to produce, in the past, you have to decide what your print run was going to be. And then there you are with your garage filled with 2,000 that never disappear and have to be pulped or whatever. At least now with self-publishing, you can produce books as you go along. You can even order on demand and so on, can't you? So there's not the kind of sunk costs that there used to be in the past, which does mean that it's a less risky thing to do now. You're not risking huge sums of money on a punt as to whether it will sell.
Yeah.
Which is great. And there will be some sunk costs if you have to get somebody to design the cover and all that kind of stuff. So there will be some sunk costs, but it shouldn't be, a massive business risk anymore.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's interesting how much more accessible self-publishing naturally has made the process of writing a book and becoming an author.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so moving on to you a little bit more, I wanted to talk about, so you're currently in the process of publishing a novel. I know that that's a very different scenario to publishing this book. You've touched upon it briefly, but tell us a little bit more about what the process looks like for you and what you're kind of doing to generate interest to publish your novel.
Yeah, so it's a kind of niche novel in the sense that in one sense it's not niche at all because it's a thriller, and so it's got a murder in it, it involves politics, it's got a lot of stuff in it that's going to be very much of general interest. But I'm also aware that because the heroine is an executive coach who is coaching a government minister, it's of particular interest to coaches. Now, I was only really sort of registered that in a ridiculous way last year, sort of last summer, I think it was, when I was just talking to a coach about it. She immediately lit up and said, oh, I love reading thrillers, and a thriller with an executive coach as the main character. Oh, I'd really love that. You ought to be making more coaches aware of the fact that you're writing it.
Yeah.
So I started getting active on LinkedIn. I'd never been active on LinkedIn before. I had this rather sort of prissy idea that, you should only link up with people on LinkedIn if you'd met them.
Okay.
So I have to say that I had about 300 people maybe, and I'd never invited anybody. I'd only responded to invitations to LinkedIn. And last summer, I just started inviting coaches. Firstly, people I knew, coaches I knew, and then coaches who knew those coaches, and I've been sort of spreading it out, and I've been looking on it as being, an activity I need to do to publicize the book. So I add on maybe 150 coaches a week.
Wow.
So I've now got about 8,500 coaches, mostly in the UK, but some in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, English-speaking world, the States. And my idea is that, so I'm posting from time to time about the novel. And I hope I'm building a potential readership, so that if I get an agent, and if the agent then finds a publisher, then I've got this sort of engaged readership.
Yeah.
Of course, the way the LinkedIn algorithm works, it's not. What would be lovely was each time you wrote something, all those 8,500 people got it, but as we know, that's not how it works.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to talk off the podcast about mailing lists and how you can get that set up so that everyone gets everything.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But basically, I'm looking for agents at the moment, and the way it works is you send a submission package to an agent. You do a lot of research first to check that the agent likes thrillers, and everything about them, whether they look like a good fit for you, that they'd like the novel. And then you send it to them with a synopsis, and usually they ask for the first 10,000 words. And then you wait for a reply, and usually you get an automatic reply saying, oh, we're always very, very busy, and probably it'll take at least 3 months for us to get to your book. And if you don't hear from us at all, then it means we're not interested. So you're thinking,
oh my goodness.
So it's not a quick, nothing in publishing is quick.
Yeah.
But there are lots of lovely agents out there. So luckily, I'm not someone who, if I get a rejection, I think, oh no, I've been personally slighted, and I'm very pragmatic sort of person. So basically, if I get a rejection, and they're usually very nicely worded, just saying that they don't think that maybe they're the right agent for this book or whatever, I just think, oh hey ho, tick it off my spreadsheet and send out another.
On to the next. Great mindset.
Yeah, because there's no point in getting hung up about it all. Otherwise, you're just sort of getting worked up for no benefit whatsoever. They're not rejecting me as a person. It's simply the book is not right for them. Fine, well, it's not right for them. They're not the right agent, and therefore I need to find the one who is the right agent. But as I say, 1,500 to 2,000 submissions they get a year, and they usually only take on one new client. So, it's going to be a long haul. But I have friends who have succeeded in getting agents and who have found publishers and so on. So I know it can be done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why shouldn't it be me? We'll see.
And I will say, please do, this is going to come out in a little bit later. Isn't it going to be nearly a month later from when we're filming this that is actually going to go active? So I will say Katharine's links to LinkedIn are going to be in the description below. Do go and check in. Keep an eye out. I know a lot of this audience are coaches or are at least online business owners. Go and see where she's at in the journey at this point and whether there's any good news.
I love having new LinkedIn mates. Honestly, I've had so many Zooms with people who I didn't know, and we've now got to know each other, and it's been such fun. I'm really enjoying it. Well, I mean, I'm an extrovert. I like meeting new people.
Amazing. So I have one question for you for the people listening, because I'm sure they're screaming at their kind of computer screens or their phones at the moment to try and get a little bit of context that what they should do. If I am a coach and I'm looking to get my book published and I'm just starting the process of kind of getting it out there, what would you say are the first few steps that I should focus on if you were talking to somebody who is just going through that right now?
And are we thinking of someone who might be thinking of self-publishing, or are we thinking of someone who might be wanting to get it traditionally published?
I think let's focus on traditional publishing. I think that's something that it seems to be a lot of people's first port of call, in self-publishing is then either a longer journey that they've already done some development on. But yeah, I'd love to hear about the mysterious worlds of publishing.
Yeah, well, for the traditional publishing route, the first thing you really ought to do is work out who you want to publish it. Because if you look at what is already out there, a really straightforward route is to look and see who is publishing the books which are like yours.
Yeah.
Because that publisher, therefore, is likely to be a target for you, because, you know, obviously they already like that kind of book and they already know how to market that kind of book.
Yeah.
So the first step is to work out who you want to pitch it to. And luckily there are a lot of publishers out there. I mean, there are, you know, the great big business selling books, selling publishers, but there are also, you know, independent publishers who are much smaller.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's getting your list together, really, of who you want to send it to. And then every publisher will have on its website a submissions process.
Okay.
So you basically go to the submissions bit and find out what they want from you. Now, the norm from non-fiction is that they will want a proposal which says, this is what the book's about. This is why I think it would sell, because this is the market. You know, this is the market for, here's my evidence for why I think there's a market for my book.
Yeah. Almost like a business plan for your book, I could imagine.
Like a business plan, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is what I plan to cover. You know, let's say it's 10 chapters and these are the topics. And here is a sample chapter or the first chapter. And that would be a pretty common requirement from a publisher as to what they would like from the author, so that they can assess whether it's something they'd like to publish or not. But equally, there are a lot of agents now who will submit to publishers on your behalf. And for fiction, as I say, you have to use an agent. It's very rare to be able to use a fictional publisher now. But for non-fiction, there are quite a lot of agents who will represent you and will help you to bash it into shape as well.
Yeah.
Because the thing about an agent is they're not just taking their 15% and taking, you know, and sending it off to publishers. They will often get quite involved in the editorial process of helping you to write it, or not exactly helping you to write it, but helping you to polish it and get it as good as it can be. So it's worth looking at the agents as well. And it's usually very easy to find out, and you literally can Google, you know, let's say you're wanting to publish a book on, oh goodness, I don't know, presentation skills, let's say.
Yeah.
If you look at organized books that have already been published on presentation skills, you can nearly always just Google who was the agent for whatever it was.
This book.
Yeah. And
Love it.
So those for me would be the first steps. Obviously, the real first step is actually working out what would go into that proposal, i.e. what is it you're going to write and why do you think there's a gap in the market for it? Because obviously that's what they want to know, really. They don't just want to know what the market is, but they want to know if it's a gap that needs filling.
Yeah.
You know, are you just adding to
noise?
The same subject? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or is there something unique that you can offer? Yes, some kind of USP obviously is very helpful, and they would normally also want to know, are you an authority in this area? You know, why would people want to read what you have written on this subject?
Yeah.
To your credentials, if you like. So they could be simply, you know, well, I've been training people in presentation skills for the last 20 years and I've now trained, you know, 10,000 people. Or it could be, you know, I've work for a very prestigious, you know, company in this area which has a big reputation, or, you know, they want to know a bit about you, your biography, if you like, as to why would it sell, why would people be interested in what you have to say.
Can I ask a question on the biography there? Do you think that in this day and age, an audience that you already have existing would have an impact to the kind of likelihood, and should be something to consider either working on first if it's a long-term goal, or making sure that you include in that kind of proposal?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the non-fiction, it probably is really helpful if you can say that you have, you know, built up a potential audience of X people. It seems to be less for fiction unless you have, you know, if you can say that you have 500,000 followers on Facebook or something, then they're likely to take note. If I say I've got 8,000 coaches like ravening wolves for my novel, and they probably wouldn't be so interested, sadly. Although, you know, I will probably include it for one or two of the agents anyway. But yes, that you're sort of following. I think it's always very useful to be able to say, for non-fiction, to say that
Yeah.
you are following. Yeah.
Good to know. Thank you so much, Katharine. I think this has given a good mixture of a little bit of insight and reflection, as well as the practical kind of next steps for people who are considering writing a book, and it being those big bolded letters on the goals list.
Yes.
Yeah. As I said earlier, I'm going to make sure that your links of where to find you on LinkedIn are included in the description below. But can I say, do you have any parting wisdom that we should touch upon before we go?
I think I'm going to come back to the buzz of signing books. It's honestly, there's nothing like it. If you have any kind of passion for writing a book at all, then go for it. If you can find the time for it, go for it.
Love it. Thank you so much for spending the time to share with us, and best of luck. I'm looking forward to updates when, because I'm sure it's a when, that your agent appears.
So, yes. Thank you, Bethan. Lovely to speak.